This is apropos. A year and a half on from the uprising that saw millions of young people take to the streets and led to the toppling of Sheikh Hasina, voters in Bangladesh are heading to the polls this Thursday. The election follows a tumultuous period that's been marked by mob violence, rising religious intolerance, attacks on the press and the fraying of the rule of law. While opinion polls vary widely, most place the Bangladesh Nationalist Party slightly ahead of an Islamist-led coalition, as Karis Garland reports.
Observers say it's a chance for Bangladesh to reset the democratic order. Thursday's parliamentary vote is the country's first since the ousting of former Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina, who ruled for 15 years. The nation's Gen Z population, who led the 2024 uprising against Hasina, are expected to come out in large numbers to vote, and their ballots could prove decisive. For them, jobs, better infrastructure and greater political freedom sit high on the agenda.
As a concerned citizen and first-time voter, I am committed to casting my ballot to help prevent any form of vote engineering.
We need better support for entrepreneurs, a stronger job market for young people and better representation at the national and international levels.
We want our leader to reinforce the riverbanks and dig new canals to further improve these agricultural lands.
The election pits two coalitions led by former allies, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party or BNP and the Islamist Jamaat-e-Islami, with opinion polls giving an edge to the BNP. Hasina's Awami League is banned and she remains in self-imposed exile in long-term ally India. Voters will elect 300 members of the sole chamber of parliament in a first-past-the-post system, while the remaining 50 seats are reserved for women. Alongside the parliamentary ballot, Bangladesh is also holding a national referendum, giving people a chance to vote on reforms to state institutions. Since Hasina's toppling, Bangladesh's transition has been overseen by an interim administration led by Nobel Peace Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus, who's promised free, fair and peaceful elections. To help ensure this, around 500 foreign observers will be present.
Well, to discuss all of this, we're joined by Chietigj Bajpaee, Senior Research Fellow for South Asia in the Asia-Pacific Programme at Chatham House. Thanks so much for being with us on the programme. Before we discuss the election itself, Chietigj, let's talk a little bit about how exactly we got here. Remind us how significant that student-led uprising was that led to the toppling of Sheikh Hasina.
So the election follows large-scale unrest, which took place in the summer of 2024, what's referred to as the monsoon revolution. This was triggered by a somewhat esoteric issue of public sector job quotas for families of war veterans. But clearly the unrest was a long time coming amid Sheikh Hasina, then Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's increasingly autocratic tendencies. Some 1,400 people were killed in the violence that summer, and this all culminated in Sheikh Hasina being ousted after 15 years in power. An interim government then led by Nobel Prize laureate Muhammad Yunus subsequently assumed power for 18 months, which brings us to where we are today, when we'll see the country essentially reverting back to democratic rule.
And how was the message delivered by the protesters back in 2024? How has that kind of been translated since the uprising itself? And how has it played out really in the lead up to this election? Because we're hearing that the two candidates most likely, one or other, to end up leading the country, they do appear quite far removed from the aspirations, the kind of dreams and hopes that many of those protesters would have had at the time.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I mean, the so-called monsoon revolution was framed as a second liberation for the country. It was aimed at breaking free of what was referred to as the era of battling begums, when power would sway, often violently, between the Awami League and the Bangladesh Nationalist Party. But with the BNP leading in some polls, the student-led party is allying itself with the Jamaat-e-Islami, the largest Islamist party in the country, and the Awami League essentially banned from contesting the elections. I think there are questions on whether we are seeing a real move towards a fresh start in Bangladesh, or is Bangladesh just going to continue business as usual with the cycle of revenge politics or the politics of protest, which has plagued the country for decades, reasserting itself.
And according to the polls, how much support is this student party currently enjoying, the NCP? And has it been badly impacted by that alliance with the Islamist party Jamaat?
Well, there are over 50 parties that are contesting the election, but as of now, it seems like it is a two-horse race between the BNP, the Bangladesh Nationalist Party, and the Bangladesh Jamaat-e-Islami, as I said, the country's largest Islamist political party, which has formed an alliance, an 11-party alliance with several other parties, including the student-led NCP, the National Citizen Party, which emerged out of the youth uprising in 2024. So I think it has undermined some of the support. We have seen a fracturing of the student movement to some degree. And as of now, it appears likely that we'll have the BNP forming a government with Jamaat leading the opposition. I mean, undoubtedly, it will be significant. It'll be the first time since 2009 that Bangladesh will have a government which is not led by the Awami League, which is Sheikh Hasina's party. But as I said, it remains to be seen if Bangladesh is able to move on beyond this, business as usual, what we've seen in the past, the politics of protest, the politics of, or revenge politics, which has plagued the country.
And we speak about the polls. Is it risky, do you think, to read too much into the polling in a country where there's been so much repression when it comes to political expression? Do you think people might be afraid to talk about how they really feel here? Could we see a remarkably different result to the one that the opinion polls appear to be suggesting is on the cards?
Well, I think there are several risks going into the election, which could even potentially undermine the credibility of the electoral process. Most notable is so we've seen several instances of violence in the run-up to the elections. Most notably in December, there was the death of a Bangladeshi youth activist, Sharif Osman Hadi, which triggered a large-scale unrest. Several Awami League supporters have also threatened to disrupt the polls, and public trust in the police has waned in the aftermath of the monsoon revolution. And in the worst-case scenario, this could potentially contribute to a lower voter turnout, although I don't think that's likely as of now. The other issues, of course, misinformation or disinformation from social media. We've seen instances of AI deepfakes, bot-generated comments, digital activism, and then finally, and perhaps most fundamentally, is the absence of the Awami League. This is, Sheikh Hasina's party. The fact that it has been barred from contesting the election also raises questions on the whole credibility of the electoral process.
Yeah, and what next for Hasina herself? She was sentenced to death in absentia for her role in suppressing that uprising back in 2024. Do you think she's ever going to face justice?
Well, I think that comes down to several issues. One is, of course, the question of, the Bangladesh, the interim government has submitted an extradition request. Sheikh Hasina is currently in India. The Indians have not yet responded to that request. But I think there are several important post-election watch points. One is the willingness and the ability of the new government to follow through with the reform agenda. This means implementing the proposed reforms of the July National Charter, which have several proposed reforms, creating a new upper house of parliament, term limits for the prime minister, creating a new presidential post, which would check the powers of the prime minister, plus broader social and economic reforms addressing issues such as corruption and reviving the economy. The second, as I've said, is moving towards this genuine national reconciliation, which would entail some sort of rehabilitation of the Awami League. And I think the third, I think, is this resetting relations with India. We've seen a rapid deterioration in relations between Dhaka and New Delhi. There have been allegations, which has been fueled by allegations that New Delhi has maintained an Awami League-centric foreign policy towards Bangladesh, which fueled allegations that India then essentially was supporting the Sheikh Hasina government and as a result supporting the government's autocratic tendencies. So I think these are some of the key watch points for the new government, which assumes power.
And, despite the problems that you've mentioned that have been experienced in the country between the uprising and the run-up to these elections, how are people feeling about the vote? Is there optimism on the streets, or are people kind of thinking political parties, perhaps they've kind of let us down, we didn't quite get what we thought we were going to get at the time of that revolution?
I think as of now, people are generally optimistic. for the country's reversion to democratic rule, for the fact that you're going to see the country have a government other than the Awami League, which is what has ruled the country for 15 years. And I think, it's also important to put this into a broader context. Bangladesh is the world's 8th most populous country. So in many ways, it can be seen as perhaps a canary in the coal mine for developments in South Asia, but also the broader global South. 40% of the electorate are young voters, aged between 18 and 30, over 40%, aged between 18 and 37. So this is, it's been referred to as the world's first Gen Z inspired election. We've seen several of these Gen Z protests or people power movements across the world. In South Asia alone, we saw the government in Nepal being ousted last year, in Bangladesh in 2024, in Sri Lanka in 2022. So I think, as I said, this will in some ways be seen as a harbinger of political or developments in other countries in the global South that have experienced these Gen Z movements.
We'll see how it all plays out on Thursday. Chietigj, thanks so much for being with us on the programme. We'll have to leave it there for now. That is Chietigj Bajpaee, Senior Research Fellow at Chatham House.